Origin of bug in reference to software. What is the origin of the expression bug when used to refer to software? Wikipedia says it's from 1843 in Ada Byron's Notes on the Analytical Engine. Another source I found was on dictionary.com. The latter observation may explain a common folk etymology of the term, that it came from telephone company usage, in which bugs in a telephone cable were blamed for noisy lines. Though this derivation seems to be mistaken, it may well be a distorted memory of a joke first current among telegraph operators more than a century ago. It seems to me that nobody really knows, and that it's just a reference that came into being maybe through another domain than software, and eventually creeped into it when computers and software were born. I've always thought that it might have been because an actual bug, insect, went into a mechanical calculator, and got jammed somewhere which messed the process.
The story I've always heard was that ADM Grace Hopper coined the term debugging when a moth was removed from the computer she was working on. Here's a link to ADM Hopper's bio, including a picture of the notebook page in which the first bug was immortalized. This URL. Update: Wikipedia shows the same picture, and says that bug and debug were in use before the first actual computer bug. Wikipedia's version of the etymology of bug says that the term had been in use in engineering for decades before the taping of the moth, and that the moth was taped into the notebook because those who found it knew the term's meaning in engineering. That seems to make more sense. Taping an actual moth into the logbook would have been more gross than funny had the term bug not already been familiar to those in the group. In my own experience, ADM Hopper's name has been associated with bug every time I've heard or read this story, probably because she often told the story herself. So, while she apparently did not coin the term, I think she deserves significant credit for cementing bug in the programmer's daily lexicon.
Use of bug in the general sense of a disruptive person is in Shakespeare Henry VI, Part 3, Act V, Scene 2, King Edward. So, lie thou there. Die thou, and die our fear, for Warwick was a bug that feared us all. Samuel Johnson's dictionary defines bug as a frightful object, a walking spectre, from bugbear, a Welsh term for a mythological monster. The earliest use in the software sense seems to be Edison. Edison in the year 1889. In that year, the Pall Mall Gazette reported that Mr. Edison had been up the 2 previous nights discovering a bug in his phonograph, an expression for solving a difficulty, and implying that some imaginary insect has secreted itself inside and is causing all the trouble.
Here, Hyperdictionary. I find this explanation. Admiral Grace Hopper, an early computing pioneer better known for inventing COBOL, liked to tell a story in which a technician solved a glitch in the Harvard Mark II machine by pulling an actual insect out from between the contacts of one of its relays, and she subsequently promulgated bug in its hackish sense as a joke about the incident, though, as she was careful to admit, she was not there when it happened. For many years the logbook associated with the incident and the actual bug in question, a moth, sat in a display case at the Naval Surface Warfare Center, NSWC. The entire story, with a picture of the logbook and the moth taped into it, is recorded in the Annals of the History of Computing, Volume 3, Number 3, July 1981, pages 285 to -286. The text of the log entry, from September 9, 1947, reads 1545 Relay Number 70 Panel F, Moth, in Relay. First actual case of bug being found. This wording establishes that the term was already in use at the time in its current specific sense, and Hopper herself reports that the term bug was regularly applied to problems in radar electronics during World War II. Indeed, the use of bug to mean an industrial defect was already established in Thomas Edison's time, and a more specific and rather modern use can be found in an electrical handbook from 1896, Hawkins' New Catechism of Electricity, Theo. Odell and Amp Company, which says, the term bug is used to a limited extent to designate any fault or trouble in the connections or working of electric apparatus. It further notes that the term is said to have originated in quadruplex telegraphy and have been transferred to all electric apparatus. The latter observation may explain a common folk etymology of the term, that it came from telephone company usage, in which bugs in a telephone cable were blamed for noisy lines. Though this derivation seems to be mistaken, it may well be a distorted memory of a joke first current among telegraph operators more than a century ago. Actually, use of bug in the general sense of a disruptive event goes back to Shakespeare. In the first edition of Samuel Johnson's dictionary, one meaning of bug is a frightful object, a walking spectre, This is traced to bugbear, a Welsh term for a variety of mythological monster which, to complete the circle, has recently been reintroduced into the popular lexicon through fantasy role-playing games. As for debugging, Wikipedia notes that the Oxford English Dictionary entry for debug contains a use of debugging in the context of airplane engines in 1945. For the use of bug in software, then, at first in the history of computers there was no real software, the program was hard-coded with hardware parts. So it seems sensible to say that the term transitioned from hardware to software when the latter started to be independent from the former. Edit. I found in Robert Leckie's book, Strong Men Armed, The United States Marines Against Japan, that he refers to a faulty airplane as a plane full of bugs. I think it was then a Navy/Marine expression at that time. The book was written in 1962 though.
The earliest evidence of bug being used in the context of a computer and in software was on April 17, 1944, predating the famous 1947 moth found in the Harvard Mark II. The ASCC Mark I arrived at Harvard in February of 1944 and was installed with the assistance of IBM engineers, see Figure 2. I.B. Cohen has examined a photocopy of the logbook kept by Robert Campbell, a young physicist at the Computation Laboratory. It tersely summarizes hours spent finding and correcting errors. On April 17, 1944, Campbell wrote, "Ran test problem. Mr. Durfee from IBM was here to help us find bugs." Peggy Aldrich Kidwell, Stalking the Elusive Computer Bug, IEEE Annals of the History of Computing, pages 5-9, October-December, 1998, Google Cache. I. Bernard Cohen, professor of the history of science at Harvard, also reported this. Cohen, I.B., The Use of Bug in Computing, IEEE Annals of the History of Computing, Volume 16, Number 2, pages 54-55, Summer 1994. And in his book Howard Aiken, Portrait of a Computer Pioneer. A photocopy of the logbook is in Library of the Computer Museum, Boston. Both the Annals papers are short and interesting reads on how the term bug found its way into programming.
Suas material, clique-se no canto.